Welcome back to Word Blindness, Dyslexia Exposed. This is Juliette Hahn here with my co-host, Brent Sopel. How are you?
Beautiful day in the neighborhood.
Yeah, what is the weather?
Oh, it's when I walked outside, it felt like it was 38.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's supposed to be all week rain, mid 50s, but there's like 20-mile-an-hour wind. So a big adjustment from the 95 we had right before you came in, the dust storm, and
such crazy weather.
yeah.
All right. Well, we're just going to jump right into this because I think we got into a really great conversation when I was in Chicago, and I was like, oh, I wish that we could be recording this right now. I was like tweaking, but it's at what cost? And so we were talking about like tutoring. And so I want to kind of jump into this, and it's really around the self-esteem, which is so essential.
Yeah. Everybody, with me, everybody, when I talk about having, 4 of the 5 Ds and addiction and all these things, but you made it. You were a professional athlete. You made millions of dollars. You got to live this amazing life, and then they go on and on. Then I get into obviously not finding out I was dyslexic till I was 32, reading a grade 4 level in high school and getting into, my traumas and my mental health and, my depression and, anxiety and suicidal, they're like, but you made it. And then I think that's where we got into is at what cost? Would I have given up my NHL career for more understanding dyslexia, understanding my life, understanding what I am, and relatability, all those things that come with this portion of dyslexia. And I always talk about dyslexia being no self-esteem. Number one contributor to mental health is learning disorders. Would I have given up my 18-year pro career to have more understanding at a younger age and have less trauma and mental health? Absolutely. There's an 18-year window where I played, pro hockey, but I had to live the rest of my life. So would I have given up? 100%.
Because do you also, and I think if someone's listening, is just to put context to it, really what you're saying is that you, because of where you were, there was not your trajectory, right? School was like, oh, he's just going to play hockey, so we're just going to not care about him, right? So you didn't feel seen and heard.
Well, and the fact that back, 30 years ago, whatever it is now, they didn't understand. It wasn't talked about, right? So I'm not going to just throw it on the fact that I was just hockey. I was Canada. Yeah, that was a big portion of it, but the other big portion of it back then was they didn't talk about it. That's why we do what we do every day.
Mm-hmm. And so I'm going to say how I think you're saying this, and then you can tell me if I'm correct or I'm not correct. So there was not a lot of understanding and relatability, right? As they just pushed you through. And as you said, and I've seen it with my oldest, when he was like, oh, this is what I used to do. And I was like, those motherfuckers, they just pushed him through, right? I could talk to so many kids that I went to school with that they just pushed through. And as a kid, when someone's just pushing you through, it's because they don't care, or they are like, I don't understand. So I'm just going to, and think about what, as a kid, as a human, right? If someone's just being like, okay, kind of brushing you off, that feels shit. So what you're saying is if you were able to also, being then a professional athlete, you focused on that, right? You weren't able to focus on what really made you tick. So you weren't able to kind of understand yourself also, because it was like, no, I just have to be in survival mode and, keep my job because I don't want to go out in the real world because I don't know what I'm going to do because I don't have that understanding relatability. I don't know so much about myself. And so you were basically just living in that world and surviving in that world. But it really, if you put it in layman's terms, it hindered your growth as a human emotionally in different ways. Am I correct?
Oh yeah, 100%. You know,
Oh,
I had
look at that.
somebody say to me, "Why don't you tell me what you see?" So now that's what every kid in grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, high school are feeling right now. There are a lot of us, we feel things, but we don't understand them. We don't know what that means, right? You know, because now you've got all the non-dyslexic people telling us what that is or what that feeling is, or no, you don't feel different, or you'll work harder, or the non-relatability. That's why when I get my hands on a dyslexic, I can change them very quickly. And a lot of times, you obviously, when you get older, you get wiser. They always say, right? You can look back and understand why. You can understand what was going on. If we're able to do that at an earlier age, you always talk about, getting kids to advocate for themselves. Nobody can advocate for themselves if they don't have the understanding. And when you have superintendents, principals telling you how to feel or what you should be feeling, and it's not that way, and it's the opposite. And why am I that kid, or why am I leaving, or why can't I do this? When you start why can't I at a young age over and over and over again, it has a major effect and impact, on your life. This weekend, you see in Louisiana, some inmates broke out of prison. And I was reading an article on CBS was making fun of one of the prisoners who spelt one of the words wrong.
Stop.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know what to say.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's so fucked up.
Right. And then they're making fun of the fucking prisoners, right? So you wonder why. And how different
so much wrong.
How different we are. Our brains are wired differently. How I get to this end of this problem is so different. Right? Take a look, at the event, like all these details and that I did, nobody understood them till the end. We may not we get to the, same result, in a different way. But when you've got to go through mountains and valleys and forests and, weeds and poison ivy to get there, and nobody else does, it's hard. And, the event, I end up doing, a lot of it, that's part of the foundation. That's what I got to do. But it's hard to sometimes to get people to do certain things because they don't, they don't see it, right? They don't understand what I'm asking them to do. Now, as a kid in second grade or fifth grade or high school, you go to the teacher or you go, and they don't understand, and they look at you like you have 10 heads, you tilt the head. It sucks. And then we got to be in school for those 8 hours, so it's, at what cost do I put my kid in extra tutoring? At what cost am I going to make sure my dyslexic kid goes to, reading tutoring, 10 hours a week? I'm just, at what cost is, dysgraphia that I'm going to push my kid so hard so that he can gain, a 5% gain? Is that 5% gain worth, X percentage of mental health? At what cost does it end up costing you to get to what that end goal is in that person's mind? Was it worth it to, climb the mountain and lose your leg?
Right. So I want to look and read this quote that I posted the other day, because one of the things that you said, and that's what I really want parents to listen to right now. Like, if you're a parent listening, I want you to fucking open your ears. Whatever you're doing something else and you're not focusing, I really want to challenge you here. There is such a fine line with tutoring and talking about the weaknesses And we need to strengthen these weaknesses. We need to strengthen these weaknesses because this is what the school, right? This is how the school, it's about the weaknesses. Like we need to get the weaknesses stronger. When you have any of the 5Ds, you're going to hit a ceiling at a certain point. Is there a certain amount of remediation? There we go. That can happen. But at what cost, as Brent just said, at what fucking cost? So I remember when we lived, and I will throw it out, Darien, Connecticut, which is a very intense place. Everyone tutored. Like you tutored even if you had straight A's because you needed to be the best of the best. And I will never forget when Montgomery was getting diagnosed and people were like, okay, so what tutor are you doing? And I'm like, he is not going to a tutor. And they're like, you just said he's really struggling in school and he's having a hard time with this and having a hard time. And I'm like, when he comes home from school, he needs to go and let his steam out. He needs to go run. He needs to go play. He needs to go play sports because that's what he's good at. And we will figure the school thing out. But I am not making that kid sit and tutor after school. I am not waking him up in the morning to get tutored before school. The school should be doing it. And we're going to figure this out. Now, the public school, no offense. Offense, whatever, however you're going to take it. Could not provide that, right? So he did go. We were very, very fortunate, but think about the people that cannot. Most people cannot. He went to a dyslexic school where then he didn't have to get, any of this. And he was able to be remediated because it was thrown down his throat during the day. And I was like, okay, I can't tell you how many parents were like, I don't understand. And I'm like, how do you not understand? They would take their kids out of the things that they were good at and make them do things on the weekends and after school. And I tell you, I know some of those kids now, and they do not have the self-esteem that my child has. And I'm not saying it because I'm saying I'm better or I'm worse. That is not what I'm saying. But I want you to really think about your child, really sit down and think. Is it better for them to have to, because there's some kids that want to be tutored. They want to be tutored because they're like, I don't like that I'm this different in school and I want to do better. And that's their drive. And they really want to do it. But it's really hard to find out, is it you want to do it? Do they want to do it? How do you find that answer? It is I am not saying that is an easy thing. So do not take this for what that is. But you need to think about what it is doing to your child to continuously struggle at what they're doing. When you struggle constantly at something in school all day and then you come home and you're struggling more, it fucks you up. Sorry.
No, it's, it's not fun to fucking struggle. So you're struggling, just think how many times you read a day, try struggling every time. Right? Keep doing that over and over and falling your face, falling your face, and falling your face. At what costs is that cost? So like I said, most people with self-esteem don't have it. Just because you got 16 degrees or 2 bachelors or 2 doctorates, do you have self-esteem? Majority of them, no. They think that you put yeah, right. The education, Dr. Jill Biden, these kind of people like that, they got no self-esteem. They think that they're bigger and better than everybody because they have the doctor in front of their name. Ego, biggest ego. There's a difference between self-esteem and ego. It's caring about somebody else or being selfless or selfish. That's huge. And that's, you can't, your mental health, and that's the biggest thing in the world right now. You talk about mental health and they're talking about cell phones out of school, and they're talking about how to keep kids in school. How about reliability? How about understanding? Nope. You wonder why the world is getting the way it is, right? It's the people have, the mental health. It's the people that have never been addicted telling us how to live. People with, struggling in school or dyslexic, that's not dyslexic, telling us what to do. When you push back on those people, they get angry, they get defensive, they get pissed off, right? well, it's okay for them to do it to us, but when the roles reverse, so it's okay. It's at the end of the day, at what cost does it add up to get to where you want to go? You know, your example, if college, everybody talks about college right now. If I'm going to be a school teacher, but I'm going to go to Harvard. Okay, what's your student loans add up going to be? What are you making to get out? Does that make sense? I'm not saying it's wrong or right. Does that make sense so it's at what cost?
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the day, at what cost? And at a certain point in time on the mental health point, you never get it back. It's a fine line. It's a very fine line.
There's a lot of messy parts in there. And then maybe later you kind of, the reason why I looked distracted is because I wanted to find this. And I read this and I was like, oh my God, this is what I've been saying for my entire life. And it is like, okay, so just imagine if schools actually helped kids identify strengths by exploring their talents from a young age and growing their skills over the 12 years instead of letting them follow all the same routine like sheep and leaving them confused in life after graduation. So the first part, and then the second part, yes, I agree. But it's also like, if we could find their strengths early and teach off of it instead of education. And I know, because you're like, no one has the understanding, but school is to find where you struggle and then try to strengthen that, right? But when you struggle because of a learning disability, it's very different than, oh, I'm just a little behind, or, oh, I need to like strengthen that. And so when you have a learning disability and they constantly IEP meetings, oh, this needs to be strengthened, this. And I mean, you guys have heard me talk about this so many times, but it's like you keep just telling this kid, these are all the things that you suck at. Let's just think about human nature. Like, let's just think about how can educators sit there and be like, okay, yes, but that, like, how can they think that this is okay? This is a human being with a heart, a little kindergartner walking in, and right away, oh, this is what they suck at. This is what they suck at. This is what they have to. It is so detrimental for mental health. And it is so fucking backwards. It blows my mind. I mean, it still blows my mind. And we do it, we've been doing it forever, right? Third grade, you suck at reading. You have to go off and read more.
Doctors, oh, this is how it's supposed to be. Why am I've helped so many people because I've been in that bad. They've never had it. They've never had this surgery. They've never had this, teachers, this is the way it's supposed to be. They're very closed-minded, and that's the problem. Is that you always talk about they don't find the strengths. They don't know what those strengths are. Because they don't have that. They don't have the awareness to look outside. Right? They're solely focused, one way. And how many times have I say certain things, and what are you talking about? How'd you get there? How'd you see that? How did you see what was going to happen? I told you 5 months ago this was going to happen, right? How? They don't see any of that. And they think they know it all.
So I have a question for you. Do you think I also think, because the way that, and listen, I didn't go through education program, so someone that maybe went through is going to say that's not it at all. But what they're taught is, this is how you have to teach, right? This is the curriculum. This is what you have to do every day. This is how you have to do it. So they're in a box because it's like, they're taught not to go outside the box. And then a personality goes into teaching because it's like, oh, and then you do have the people that are like, I struggled in school. I want to make a difference. I want to. Yeah. And then I've interviewed a lot of those people that have gotten out of it because they're like, I can't make a difference in a kid's life because you have to follow the sheep. You have to do it a certain way because this is the education system in New York. We have to teach for the regions. It doesn't matter if a kid finds this interesting. Nope, sorry, we can't go there. We have to bring you back because this is our timeline. This is how we have to do it. This is it. A, B, C, D. There's no going off of that because that's the education system, or do you think it's something different?
That's them.
coming from the top? Is that like,
well, that's part of, education system, but that's who they are, right? They can only do one thing, right? And that's, we can keep all the same timelines. I can get the same answer by asking that question a different way. And they don't have that ability.
mm-hmm.
But the problem that I find is that if you ask them a question, they get so defensive right away. I'm the teacher. I know best, right? I know, right? It's very well, rarely is it the willingness to listen. Like listening what the kid says. So how many times do I talk about, I can get an answer from somebody else. So I ask a certain question, how many times in the group text, I started a, as you guys say, a fight, but I got my answer, right? By wording a question a certain way, and how they answer it tells me everything. So you can stay on timelines. I understand what timelines, you've only got so many hours and you got this and that. But they don't have the awareness to ask that question. Or, was it that one teacher? We were talking about an essay. What about a verbal essay?
Mm-hmm.
And I think you told her, and you're like, I've never thought about that.
Right.
It's.
And then they went to the school and they were like, they can't do it because it's not in our parameters. It has to be done this way.
Well, and that's the difference, right?
I would say there's gray and it's always black and white in school.
It has to be done this way. Oh, really? Okay. So that's why we are where we are, and it's the same people that are, getting paychecks, doing the same thing over and over. And we've failed over and over for how many years? What's the old saying? You're doing the same thing over and over and it's not working. So if you keep doing it, it's insanity.
Yeah.
That's insanity.
And now because again, I know so many teachers and they're, brilliant, wonderful, creative humans that have gone into teaching for a reason. And I have talked to them as the years and they're like, I'm so burned out because you can't do it the way that they want to because it has to fit into this. But the other thing is that I think is really interesting is just put yourself as a kindergarten teacher, right? Think of all those curious minds. Mm-hmm. I mean, I know I drove my kindergarten teacher crazy because I'd be like, oh, wait, what about this? What about that? But that's the way I learned, right? So you think that you have, and this is where the whole thing needs to be revamped because think about one teacher, right? That wants to be there to help and make a difference. And then you have all of these little people asking all different questions. It's like, no, everyone has to stop. We have to do this in order because then it's chaos, right? So then, but you think about the kids. I mean, my sister told a story when we were all together that she had a question about cells or atoms or something. And she asked, now this is when she was older, but she asked the biology teacher.
Oh, yeah.
And the biology teacher, she's like, now I know she didn't know the answer. She's like, but she made me feel dumb. She's like, I never asked a question again and then failed biology.
Well, so now I remember this, but I don't think she didn't know the answer.
She maybe just didn't want to answer it the way.
No, I don't, how many questions have I asked you or Elizabeth, asked the question, you didn't understand what I was asking.
Right. Or right.
Right. So I don't, and not necessarily that, she probably knew the answer, but she didn't understand what she was asking. And that's a prime example of us, how different, different we are, right? How different our brains are, on my patents, like, showing one of the guys, the pro guys on Saturday, he's like, how do you see that? How did you do that? And, Oz is like, oh, this, yeah. Right. So it's the worst of it. Elizabeth's like, what? Like, I don't know what you're asking me. So we're wired. So
yes.
we're wired very differently. Right. So it's not, I wouldn't, it's sometimes you don't even understand what we're trying to say. Right. Cause it's almost like we're speaking a different language.
No. And you're so right. And I have to say, I think that there's more, I mean, I think one of the reasons why when we connected, like I don't think there's really, I think maybe one or two times I've been like, wait, I don't get it. And I've had you like but not most of the time I totally understand what you're saying. Right. But we've talked about this,
Most
like,
people are like, have no idea what you just said, what you're talking about.
and then you have to rephrase it. And it's so frustrating. I mean, I've been in those situations a lot.
Mhm.
There's been times where I've talked to Dan about something and he's like, what?
Yeah.
It's like, I don't get it. And I'm like, oh, what do you mean you don't get it? How can I rephrase this? And then I have to think about, I'm like,
And
I
that's
don't
when we question ourselves, right? And what's wrong with us, right?
Right. Well, why?
Like, we're the
Maybe
problem.
I said it wrong.
Yeah,
Right. Maybe I didn't explain myself correct. How many times do you say, maybe there's so many times where I've been like, I'm sorry, maybe I wasn't clear.
Right. And that's the other side of this, how many times would we do that a day or a week or a year, right? That the other side doesn't. So take a look at all those hits that we take, right, compared to them, right? So it's those things add up.
Right. And that's
really quickly.
And what is the cost? Because it is. We talked about this way back when, where I will in like emails, does this make sense? Or I've said, does this make sense? And I've stopped saying it because I used to say it too much.
I say it all the time.
Right. Yeah. And I said to you, wait, do you say it because you don't think someone is understated? Like, it was actually, we kind of both realized that we both did it. And I think we did it a little different, but I even in emails now, I love ChatGPT because I can tell ChatGPT what I want to say and they'll move my words around. So it flows better. When I speak, it's not as much, but definitely when I write, I'll be like, and there's so many times someone will say, I don't like use that. I don't understand what your question.
It's funny. When I'm sending an email, whatever, I don't say that. I'll always follow up with it. Did you get that email? Did you get it? But when I'm speaking to somebody, 8 out of 10 times I will ask, does that make sense? Right?
Does it make sense? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Our approach is so different, right? My approach is so different. What we're trying to do is so different. It's not like anything else. It's like something that's never been done before. So 8 out of 10 people will say they don't, right? Because it's, what are we trying to get to? That email is a prime example, right? Of coming in there and not seeing, what we're, for me, it's, they never understand what I'm trying to do, ever.
Right.
Once they see it, right? Once they come to the event or once they come and see it happen or once this is corrected or done, they're like, oh, okay, I get it. But to getting to that point, never, so for me is, I'm always saying, because it's a true question. Did that make sense to you?
Mm-hmm. Do you get it? But think about how many people also don't say they don't get it. Like there's
I usually can see.
I can totally tell, right? I usually can tell they're like, they have no fucking idea what I'm talking about.
Yeah, they get a little shoulder. They kind of,
Yeah, totally.
You can see, and that's where my wording comes into play for me is I can say certain things and I understand if they really mean it. I can stand how they react or,
there's so many times I'm like, they didn't get what I said.
Yeah. What I'm trying to do, I need this done and I got to tell it 16 different ways. And that's what they always say.
And it's so tiring.
Got to work triple as hard as a normal person, just to get to that, to get to that. And that's the thing is how hard we've got to work
all the time.
And
all the time.
People, there's a difference between working hard and working smart. And people always say, "Oh, they work. They've got a good work ethic. They work hard." That's a very fine line and very slippery slope to being dangerous.
1,000,000,000%. I could not agree with you more. And we've talked about this. Maybe it has to be another episode, but like with my kids, seeing study habits and seeing one that I'm like, wait a second, you're studying a really long time. Like, I need to understand why you're studying. Like, what class is this? Is this because, well, no, I need to write everything down and then I need to do this and I need to do that. And I have that appointment today, by the way, the first intake, because it is very different because there is like, yes, you could be, there's the people that, right, they're workaholics because they're hiding.
Well, there's again, mental health, right? There's workaholics is, okay, what are they getting away from?
Right. Then there's also the people that do have just strong work ethic, right? I mean, I think I look back at some of the stuff and I'm like, you know what? I know, like, if I say I'm going to do something, I will get it done. Like, that's like a work ethic, but if something is, I don't take 30 hours to do it. Like, if it's not something that, yeah, I mean, we can that we're going to close this out because I don't want to go down a different
rabbit hole.
Yeah. Which I could do with you all day,
Well,
but
and you remember I said, before you jump in there, remember I said that certain person in your family, right? Who, you're like, oh.
So I started unpacking things.
Oh,
we'll see where that goes.
You don't have a kid and, 2 days you're in a boardroom.
Yes, it's going to be interesting, but I want you guys listening to ask yourself at what cost, seriously, because it's a huge fine line. I don't know the answer for your child.
Yeah. Every person's different, right? It's, you can't quantify it with X, Y, and Z. Every person is different. But the one thing most of this world don't have is self-esteem.
And that's what makes the world go around. Thank you for listening to another episode of Word Blindness, Dyslexia Exposed. You know what I say every single time, like, rate, review, and share, but you don't know who is sitting there tutoring their kid to fucking death. And the kid, maybe needs to go run and play. And that's like what it is. And then, and it's really important to think about that. So thank you.